So I'm going to try to encapsulate Chinese espionage and interference tactics against all of the West in 15 minutes. So here we go. So really for the last 2 decades plus, the West's security and intelligence forces have been focused on counterterrorism, and for good reason. Counterintelligence was wound down following the end of the Cold War. But throughout that time, there has been a significant threat to the West, to democratic institutions, to our economic security, and that has been steadily growing to where it is no longer subtle. So I will talk about the PRC, China, People's Republic of China. And they're specifically in the realm of espionage and foreign interference, or malign foreign influence, depending on your terminology. The playbook that I'm going to outline is global. It's persistent, and it was really honed and tested domestically before it was exported abroad. And it's a fundamental challenge, I would say, to the sovereignty of nations that we're dealing with right now. And this isn't, for China, this isn't spy versus spy. This isn't intelligence officer versus intelligence officer, as the Cold War was often portrayed. This is a whole of society effort that they engage in. They regularly blur the lines between diplomacy, between business, even between criminal activity and espionage. They target us from cyberspace right down to the city blocks within our communities. So, and really that difference between the Cold War era and the Soviet Union is fundamental to understanding the threat that China poses now. It's not as if influence is somehow a new thing that developed with the PRC. It was used, of course, by Russia, but the communist system was a closed system. It was Russia became an easy adversary to see and to identify. Whereas with China, the opening of the economy in the late 70s and early 1980s allowed for that growth and that belief system to emerge, that this was going to be a place that it was going to liberalize. This is a counterweight that we can support against the Soviet Union, against Russia. And so yet, I would say that the greatest success or achievement of China being an adversary, dare I be so bold to say enemy of the West, is its ability to convince many that it is not an adversary, or in fact that it is an adversary that we somehow still need. So I'm going to draw on some examples from my recent book that's coming out in November, Under Assault, one more well-known than the other. So first, the relentless campaign in the cyber realm is the first area that we're going to go to, and the realm of industrial espionage. And as the former director of NSA had stated, that this area constituted, quote, the greatest transfer of wealth in human history, end quote. While many Western technology firms have been victims, the most critical targets have been related to Western or US national defense. Prime example here I'm going to draw on historically is the case of Su Bin, a Chinese businessman that was operating from within Canadian borders. He was an engineer. He acted, though, as a spotter, directing PLA hackers in China to where to go in terms to steal vast amounts of data on cutting-edge American military aircraft, including the C-17 transport, which the PRC often had a difficult time trying to construct their own version of, the F-22 Raptor, and even the F-35 fighter jet. And he would identify, so there's a human element to the cyber. It wasn't as if the cyber was just acting independently of the human intelligence side. He identified key engineers to target. He sifted through thousands of stolen files to pinpoint the most valuable secrets to obtain. And that operation allowed Beijing to obtain research and development worth tens of billions of dollars for a fraction of the cost eroding that American military advantage. And the biggest concern that the FBI raised, as one agent put it, was, quote, "I don't know how many Sue Bins there are," end quote. So the second area that I'm going to look at, that the CCP, the Communist Party of China, seeks to influence elites through, is the United Front Work Department, the UFWD. Now, as a strategy, so United Front lowercase, as I often put, those roots extend back to the days of Vladimir Lenin and the idea to build alliances within a target society and amongst its most influential members. And this is the CCP's primary overseas influence arm, with the UFWD being in charge of that United Front strategy. And it works to co-opt influential figures in politics and business, in academia. One of the key tools that they used was the 1,000 Talents Plan, which has now since been renamed and reorganized. That's the common way that China deals with getting too much attention for a particular program, is we'll change the name. So it used lucrative grants to entice Western academics to share research in intelligence fields. Why steal something you can get without having to do so? In 2019, a US Senate report revealed that the participants were often required to sign contracts with secrecy clauses, giving Chinese institutions the right to the intellectual property that was developed, even if it was funded by the Western taxpayer. And it led the US Department of Justice to launch the China Initiative to try to counter that threat, but that has since been abandoned. But it demonstrates that long-term threat that China poses in the investments that they make. Third area of talking about PRC espionage and influence is transnational repression. The attempts to control and direct and bully the diaspora within Western communities. Also, though, I would say to also build networks, and as almost a place to start in terms of operations. China targets what it deems to be the 5 poisons: the pro-democracy movements, the supporters of Taiwan, independence for Tibet, the Uyghur population, and the Falun Gong religious group. Although these days, you could probably maybe have about a dozen poisons that the PRC has now found and created, ranging from topics of Chinese control of the South China Sea to Hong Kong to you name it. So the UFWD and PRC missions cultivate proxy organizations. They can be community-based organizations that will claim to speak for the Chinese community as the official spokesperson because it has a pro-Beijing or supported stance. But other proxy organizations include ones that have been around for quite some time, such as the Chinese Students and Scholars Association, the CSSAs. They monitor students, they look for counter narratives that are critical of the CCP. There's other avenues as well. In 2023, the FBI arrested 2 individuals in New York for their role in operating what was called a, quote, police station, a Chinese police station. A stark example, I would say, of how I understand China's activities as being they engage in transnational repression because they have a transnational conception of sovereignty, in that they believe that a citizen, a former citizen of China, even sometimes through heritage, they have a right to control, irrespective of the laws where that person lives. So there's also this disturbing nexus, I would say, between the Chinese state and organized crime. A ProPublica investigation detailed how Chinese government operatives are tied to criminal bosses in the United States and Europe, triad groups who harass dissidents, engage in political interference and influence, and actually move money for CCP officials. One US veteran of national security had stated that organized crime is doing services for the Chinese government to become its eyes and ears overseas. And there's a few reasons that the PRC uses this tactic. It provides the state with plausible deniability. It also allows them to utilize networks that are better developed in terms of the organized criminal activity. They have a better understanding of the network of operations where the PRC wants to operate. And sometimes there's things that criminals just do better than government officials. So to understand, I would say the long-term impact that these kinds of operations can have, we'll go back to a pivotal moment in the Cold War. So new declassified documents that I obtained revealed that Canada's official recognition of the PRC in 1970, I argue, was likely a targeted major foreign interference operation, with the United States and the international community being the ultimate prize. So the key figure there was a Canadian-born academic named Paul Lin. Lin had deep ties to the highest levels of the CCP. And what I discovered in those declassified files was that Lin was identified as far back as the 1960s as a, quote, agent of influence for Beijing. So Lin acted as a secret intermediary for the Canadian government during its negotiations with China. It was quietly shaping policy to align with Beijing's interests. And the result was the Canadian formula, as it was called, a diplomatic model that led to other Western nations recognizing not just the PRC, but the one China policy. And that included the isolation of Taiwan. This, ironically, happened in Stockholm, where the negotiations took place. But it was never about Canada, specifically. The PRC's Ministry of Foreign Affairs later admitted, 2010, they targeted Canada first precisely because it was America's closest ally. When Chairman Mao had learned of the success in terms of recognition in the manner that the PRC sought, he laughed and he stated, quote, "Now we have a friend in America's backyard," end quote. So most critically for Western audiences, the operation didn't, especially the United States, the operation did not end there. Paul Lin's intelligence file shows his next mission was the US, to cultivate academics, politicians, to sway American public opinion in favor of recognizing China. And it's a powerful lesson that a security vulnerability within a trusted ally is a direct threat to the others. Now, the important takeaway here was not recognition just for the sake of recognition. It was recognition in a manner that was agreeable to Beijing and that had lasting implications to the present. So, what do we do about this? So, I would say we need a robust, multi-pronged strategy. First, I would say greater transparency is something that we have to work on. The US has a Foreign Agents Registration Act. Far other allies are creating their own registries. It's a crucial first step. Furthermore, security services have to get more comfortable with public disclosures to inform citizens about ongoing threats. This is something that intelligence services in the West have to get better at. Leveraging NATO foreign interference, I think, is also an option, a multilateral approach to try to counter hybrid threats. So if an ally is targeted, respond collectively with sanctions and the expulsion of diplomats. Build real partnerships with diaspora communities. Don't just view them as a vector for threats, but look at the vulnerabilities that the communities are primary victims of transnational repression. Build that trust and provide those resources. And go on the offensive. We have to adapt counterintelligence methods. China's strength is in the use of co-opted, non-professional intelligence individuals. And we have to begin a united front of our own to try to counter that. In conclusion, the threat is real. It's been operating in plain sight for half a century. We have been complacent for too long, choosing to believe in a version of China that we wanted to see rather than the one that was actually there, working against our interests. And I would say, from echoing what Taiwanese activists had told me, that worth remembering is that, quote, no matter how tall the mountain is, it cannot block the sun, end quote. Thank you.